There's a fight taking place tomorrow night that not many people will know about. Robert Helenius versus Franz Rill. Now, most people watching probably haven't heard of Franz Rill. I'll be honest, I hadn't until this fight was announced. But it is worth taking note here. The guy is unbeaten. He's 11-0. And the winner of this fight is rumoured to very likely face Anthony Joshua at some point next year. So there's some potential here for a bit of UK interest, if that makes sense. Robert Helenius, one of the most highly rated heavyweight prospects in the division. You know, he's fighting guys like Samuel Peter, Derek Chisora, etc. and fighting reasonable standard of names. I think Robert Helenius was actually the European champion before, but obviously he's fighting to get the belt back here. Now, most people felt he lost to Chisora. Quite controversially, I actually scored that fight to Robert Helenius. I seem to be one of the very, very few people out there who actually agreed with the judges that night. And I'm a Chisora fan. But, yeah, I mean, Helenius obviously did some damage to himself in that fight. He had some sort of bad injury, he had some promotional dispute, and he disappeared off the scene for quite some time. This year he's come back. I think he's had two warm-up fights and an exhibition. He's also been sparring extensively, as I understand it, with Vladimir Klitschko. You know, Klitschko wanted to bring in a tall opponent ahead of his matchup with Tyson Fury. So, you know, Robert Helenius was brought in and sparred lots of rounds out there. Probably been sparring with the likes of Dillian Whyte as well. So, you know, Helenius, whilst he's been off the radar for some time, he's probably more tuned up for this fight than people would anticipate, you know. And let's not forget, he was actually due to fight Erkan Tepe in this fight, who is a very, very decent opponent, as David Price fans will know. So, yeah, my point is that whilst Helenius has been off the scene, he's maybe not been as off the scene as would first appear. You know, he's had an exhibition that isn't even on his record. He's had the two warm-up fights that we do know about, and he's had this sparring camp with Vladimir Klitschko. You know, I just saw the weigh-in now. Helenius came out with a group of gents dressed as Vikings carrying axes and that sort of things. He's obviously a bit of a character. And I've got to say, he looked absolutely massive at the weigh-in. You know, the opponent, Franz Rill, I understand from his previous fights, he's 6'4", best part of 17 stone, you know, and Helenius looked like an absolute monster compared to him. So, you know, I don't know what Helenius' stats are, but if this Franz Rill is really 6'4", Helenius is at least 6'7", 6'8", and if that Franz Rill is 17 stone, Helenius is at least 18, 19 stone, so he is a very, very big unit. And for me, Helenius, I've watched all of his comeback fights. You know, I'm a fan of the heavyweight division. He's looked decent so far. Decent, but unexceptional. What I would say is, you know, he can box okay from long range. I think he's one of these fighters who probably doesn't have the most elite inside game. You know, that happens to a lot of the real tall fighters. And I think that's why the Erkan Tepe matchup would have been, you know, really, really interesting for us heavyweight boxing fans. I also think that's why Derek Chisora would have caused him problems. Now, Franz Rill, I haven't seen a lot of him. I've actually watched 2 or 3 rounds of him boxing before making this video. So, it could be one of those where I am grossly underestimating an opponent because I frankly haven't had the time and possibly haven't had the inclination to sit through and watch some of his fights. If you've been following Franz Rill from the start, fair play to you. Please do comment in this video, let me know what you think about him. What I can tell you is in terms of record, he has fought nobody of the standard of Robert Helenius. This is a huge jump up for him. This is the equivalent of, I don't know, I'll try and think of a UK professional boxer with a similar resume. I mean, let's put it this way. Hughie Fury, Anthony Joshua, Dillian Whyte, Joseph Parker, none of those guys have fought a guy as capable as Robert Helenius. And all of those guys have more fights and vastly superior opponents to Franz Rill. You know, Rill was fighting Paul Butlin earlier this year and went the distance with him. You know, we saw what Anthony Joshua did to Paul Butlin. Paul Butlin going 8 rounds with you, suggests you may not be the most elite power puncher out there. Even more interestingly, I think one of the judges scored Paul Butlin 2 or 3 rounds in an 8-round fight. So, again, the signs aren't looking too good for Franz Rill based on record. Having seen him box, and as I say, I've seen him box for a few rounds, he looks basic to me. Slow-footed, ponderous, fights behind a jab, relatively orthodox in that sense, but quite a basic jab, not a fast jab, not a snappy jab. And I just think Franz Rill is going to have to find a whole new level ahead of this matchup. And looking at him at the weigh-in, looking at his resume, looking at him in the ring, I'm not so sure that this guy's got another level. You know, for me, Helenius looks the vastly superior operator here. I expect Robert Helenius to win, and I probably expect him to win by knockout. You know, don't get me wrong, I've not seen anything to suggest that Rill is weak-chinned or anything of that nature. But when the gap in class appears to be as vast as I expect it to be, and when the step up in class is equally as vast, and when it's over the championship distance, when you've been fighting shorter fights, I think a knockout seems likely here. Robert Helenius, he's a guy who a lot of people in the boxing community really seem to have an interest in, you know, and he would be good to throw into the mix of the heavyweight division right now. Helenius versus Tepper is a legitimate 50-50 fight. You know, a fight that us hardcore boxing fans would really enjoy. There's a huge UK interest here. You know, we've got a lot of fighters around European title level. Chisora, the returning David Price, Anthony Joshua, Hughie Fury, maybe even throw Dillian White back into the mix after his return from injury. Don't be surprised to see the winner of this fight mixed it up with a UK fighter. Helenius has already fought Michael Sprott. Helenius has already fought Derek Chisora. So don't be surprised at all. I'm picking Robert Helenius, and I'm picking him comfortably. Let me know your thoughts. If you know more about Franz Rill, I want to hear about it. Educate me. Are you going to watch the fight? Do you see there being any real interest here for UK fighters? Thanks for watching.